Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
WESN.
Michael Small. I am no longer that scruffy looking. This is Talking Point on WSN, the content capital. And one of the things that has been coming to my mind these days more and more is the word consistency. Consistency, pretty simple. Word to explain, I guess, word to understand. Acting or doing in the same way over time, especially as to be fair or accurate. It's easy to say, it's easy to understand. Doesn't seem to be so easy to do. One of the areas where parents, teachers, adults, just in everyday life, but particularly with children, one of the easiest pitfalls is to not be consistent, to not act in the same way, utilizing the same methodology, the same justification, the same determination, the same way over time, over multiple decisions. And at some point, kids pick up on it. It might take a while. And it's just to show that, hey, we're not all perfect. You know, one of the areas where we also fall short, just in the workplace, both employers and employees, both low-level, entry-level worker bees, supervisors, managers. It seems odd, but on some level, one of the things you can praise a human for and it be genuine is if whether or not they are consistent. Now, we're not talking about high-stakes, high-performance situations. That obviously, people who could be high-performance athletes, high-performance entertainers, CEOs, innovators, strategic thinkers, those who could be consistent in high-pressure situations, that's a separate thing. I'm talking about just the capacity to be consistent throughout the entirety of one's job, no matter how mundane it is. That doesn't seem to be a universal trait by humans. And one of the areas where politicians seemingly fall short more often than not is consistency. So there's a couple of things to look at. Let's not necessarily start with the same topic that's been at the front burner for the last few days. Let's go with Independence Day. It was interesting now to consider, are we going to have an Independence Day parade? Because the justification, if my memory serves correct, was, well, it wasn't safe. And we had a state of emergency, and it pulls resources because you have to put on a parade with the protective services, and you might not want to be doing that when you have security obligations, personnel obligations throughout the country. And of course, there was also the whole threat against government personnel. Now, lo and behold, we are in a second year, essentially, of a state of emergency. which also includes threats against the government. So on some level now, what is the difference between this year and last year? Is it the nature of the threat? Now, we are not explained or told the nature of the threat. Has certain alleged members of the criminal underworld from certain constituencies, they're no longer with us? The threat is not as severe as it was last year? I don't know. Now, to be fair to the government, one could argue narratively, they're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If they have the Independence Day parade, people can't complain, well, all of a sudden, we still have an SOE, but you have the Independence Day parade. If they don't have the Independence Day parade, however, people can also complain another year in a row, we don't have the Independence Day parade. There's not really a winning side of this equation. But one of the things with regards to consistency is, generally speaking, when you're acting in good faith, when you're acting above board, when you have good reason, it's not supposed to be that hard to explain yourself so that you can fulfill the requirements necessary in order to be acting consistently. Because if you're in good faith, your principles will be rooted in deep-seated ethical considerations, particularly again with regards to fairness, which that's one of the aspects of consistency. That's one of the reasons why you are consistent. You act in the same way over time, especially so as to be fair or accurate. Because you don't want people to feel as though the standards change from person to person, situation to situation, year to year, arbitrarily. People will pick up on that. People won't know how to respond to that. But there was a big fuss about not having the parade last year. And also, I'm fairly certain I have felt the same way over situations in the last government. So it's not necessarily to say that, oh, this is some brand new sin of a UNC administration. However, what the last government did doesn't justify what you're doing or what you're not doing. And I think that's one of the things that people need to understand. Part of consistency is not to say, well, we complain about the other guy doing it, so it's okay for the new guy to do it. No, you complain about the new guy doing it as well. It's still wrong. If it was wrong then, it's wrong now. One thing I could think of is the meritless situation. They made a whole mess about getting Gary Griffin off the list, only to have to then go through the process with him on the list anyway. Didn't really make much of a difference, right? And it exposed, well, what was the real purpose of not having him on the list? All of a sudden, you're not necessarily as concerned. You're not showing us a consistent series of decisions. Consistency. Speaking about consistency and state of emergency, usually, of course, we hear threats against the government, threats against maybe judges, prosecutors. We know that before the PNM enacted a state of emergency, before the end of their time in office, a prosecutor was killed, a lawyer was killed. Now, apparently, the Commissioner of Police has been threatened by an anonymous phone call via the 999 hotline. Well, when I say anonymous, anonymous to us, I don't know if it's anonymous to the state. And I won't necessarily quote exactly what was said, I'll just paraphrase. The caller, allegedly, was basically speaking about the fact that the gang leaders, they want to get out of prison, get out of whatever detention orders they're in, and the threat is, if that isn't made happen, then perhaps gangsters might target the Commissioner of Police's two daughters. And we've seen a situation where Deputy Commissioner of Prisons, a couple years ago now, was attacked right in front of his house one morning. And we should be very grateful that we never saw similar situations continue, which could have led to some serious escalation. One could argue that it did, but then it died down immediately. But I'll leave that there. Now, the commissioner is quite defiant, and on some level, I can understand that. If he can't do the job because of threats to his family, he should resign. So he has no choice almost but to be defiant in the situation. He can't publicly now start to show any kind of influence by these sorts of things. And it's not about, well, any public official really and truly cannot allow themselves to be controlled by threats. But coming out of this, of course, you have the commentary now, right? First of all, apparently there was rumors or there was a narrative that there was a senior police officer who was making the threats and that he fled the country, and ACP Richard Smith basically denied those directly. And then, of course, the Minister of Homeland Security, he also commented on the situation. Quote, "The Commission and I, we speak on a daily basis just like in any other institution for which I'm the line minister," end quote. Continuing, quote, "We spoke and what I can say is the information seems to be credible. I have a lot of confidence in the Commissioner of Police. He knows what to do and what angle to take this. That is why I was telling patients before. What I was trying to explain to them is every time we get in Parliament and give the information as to the threats that are coming to ministers, etc., people outside there are changing the game. So if I say a threat is coming with a box in Parliament, are you still going to use a box? So the information keeps coming. I have a lot of confidence in the Commissioner of Police and his team. He has my full support of his actions once it is within the framework of the law." Now the thing is, I'm not entirely sure, do they really come to Parliament and give information as to the threats? I mean, I know they give information that, according to them, a threat exists. I never heard that they gave information to threats. Consistency. The Commissioner of Police is allegedly under threat. We're getting information about the phone call and what the caller said, etc., etc. There was threats against MPs. Not even the Red House staff got information that the threat existed on the day. Everybody was told after the fact. Consistency. I don't know where the minister says every time we get in Parliament and give the information as to the threats. The first go around, we didn't get information with regards to what the threats were, except there was a syndicate looking to destabilize the government, to harm senior government officials, etc., etc. That's it. As far as we're aware, none of the PDOs were directly tied to those threats against the government, unlike the situation with the Hadids. And we were told there was a syndicate, but then when the protests over police shooting had calls for gangs to unite, I just found it was weird because I thought they were already united because there's a syndicate. I didn't realize that the gangs didn't unite yet. So then what was the syndicate that you were talking about? To say that it was something new and different. This was a grave threat. Did they come together and then split apart that fast? We never got told that information. So it's very interesting as to when do we get information and when do we not get information? Consistency. One of the interesting things now is, and this is an interesting twist, the Commissioner of Prisons has been sent on leave after the association, the Prisons Officers Association, complained about alleged VIP treatment being given to one Mr. Dominic Hadid. which is interesting because according to communications from his lawyer, he and his wife suffered horrible conditions in the prisons. And it's not about the fact that they shouldn't be suffering, it's about the fact that the conditions were generally bad and should have been addressed from before, regardless of who is having to experience it. So now the question is this an overcorrection? Was those previous statements not entirely the truth? What's the narrative? What is the reality with regards to Mr. D? That's number one. But number two, the complaint with regards to how Mr. D is being treated is the fact that it is exceptional and that the other prisoners or detainees are taking note of the fact that not everybody is being treated equally, even though technically they're all either arrested or under detention orders and arguably have the same status, right? If you are arrested, it shouldn't matter how much money you have in a private capacity outside. You are here to be detained. Not that I'm saying that Mr. Adid is guilty, but just the principle of what the Prison Association was concerned about. Because they're saying that, look, he's outside of his cell after 8, after 9 in the night. Most of the day, apparently, he's in the prison's administration building, which is not a building to house prisoners. And he has apparently been seen watching football in the administration building. Meanwhile, other detainees are kept in their cells, and they are noticing this, and that is causing the other detainees or gangsters on the outside to threaten the prison officers due to what they would see as unfair treatment. Officers reported being threatened by other detainees who believe Hadid was receiving preferential treatment. There are detainees there who are not getting those privileges. This is a quote from the head of the POA. And some made threats to officers based on the special treatment they saw him getting. Those detainees don't be out in the night and things like that. So the Commissioner of Prisons has been sent on leave, which is one of those situations, given what has happened with him before in that position and with the prison service, one could only question, all right, at some point, when are we going to get this accountability thing in the prison service, you know, not make it so apparent? That's point number one. But point number two, the treatment. Now, on some level, who made, if there's preferential treatment, who made the decision? Because one of the things that you have to be concerned about is if you go overboard, you can't actually get enough evidence to charge. I'm surprised, I don't know if ILA has a lawsuit filed, but if you can't charge Mr. Hadid, his wife, and his aunt for anything, given what we've seen with previous situations in previous SOEs who had cases up to a year or two ago, I believe, or 2 or 3 years ago, now coming to their conclusion, now giving their payouts to the plaintiffs, one could only imagine if the conditions were horrible and they were held for an extended period of time, all these detainees, what kind of lawsuits they could bring. So on some level, if they are no longer being subjected to horrible treatment, does that limit the potential lawsuit that might come down the pipe? Just saying, just asking. Of course, there are other things that can be speculated about in this situation with regards to how this alleged preferential treatment happened. That's why it's important to ask the question, who made that decision. Obviously, Mr. Hadid is not going to have the key to the prison in his back pocket, and he's just going to tell the guard, well, I have decided that I will let myself out, and I will go and watch football. And all the guards would be like, well, all right, if you insist. No, somebody had to make that decision, whether or not he requested it or not. We don't know if he requested it. Maybe he did. Maybe they're trying to show, oh, you know, it's not so bad, please. Don't sue us. Or something else. Don't know. But the key point of the matter is the fact that the inconsistency, allegedly, if it is true, of treatment, you start off with who authorized that, but then you have to go, that leads to the why. And therein lies the rub. Whenever there's inconsistencies in messaging, inconsistencies in political speak, inconsistencies in policy decisions, that question why, more than anything else, is going to rear its ugly head. It's going to rear its ugly head, and if you can't give a good answer, because it's one thing to appear to be inconsistent, but perhaps there's an explanation because the circumstances in one situation is different to the circumstances in another situation. The key is to have the capacity to give a detailed explanation, which is something that most politicians tend to not want to do. I don't know if you've noticed. We don't actually get detailed explanations the vast majority of the time. What we get is very surface level stuff. Very surface level stuff, with the idea being that it's going to appeal to our emotions. Doesn't this sound right to you? Right? It's going to appeal to our emotions, or it's going to try to do its best to kind of brush past us before people ask questions. It's almost like if we just get told the conclusion, so we kind of accept it based on the delivery, not based on the merits of why that conclusion is potentially valid. So we don't question it. I mean, look, stand your ground laws, right? The justification of stand your ground laws, what was the actual technical details of that justification? How did they describe the difference it was intended to make as compared to what the status quo was before, where you still had the right to protect your property and defend yourself? What was the big change supposed to be with stand your ground legislation? No, it was just empty-matic. We will give you the chance to defend yourself. But they didn't explain, all right, but why is this extra legislation needed? They didn't go into any detail. And then what was the result? Well, the result was nothing. Much to do about absolutely not one fart of a thing. Consistency. That's why I get scared when I see politicians call something evil, call something irresponsible, call something whatever you want to come up with. And then when it's their turn, they basically do the same thing. I agree with the commenter yesterday when he said, oh, look, this legislation that the PNM apparently enacted is going to be used against them. How funny. It's true. It's true. One of the things with Explain Your Wealth was, ironically, this very concern that the PNM now has. But in the past, it was people had the concern that the PNM would use the law this way. So the delicious irony of it is not lost on me. I don't have an issue with it. But the flip side is this. While I can appreciate the minor entertainment value on a personal level and have a chuckle for about 5 seconds, we had these questions about the use of certain laws against certain figures. Not necessarily maybe on this scale, but we had those questions then. We had those concerns then. There were concerns then, should there not be concerns now? Consistency. Because in the evaluation of your political party, how many of you do your best effort to explain away anything that appears negative, no matter how much the evidence makes it potentially undeniable, how much weight the evidence carries, how much substance is there to suggest things are not what they seem and things are not necessarily A-okay. But it's your side, so you cannot believe in negative criticism. You have to disbelieve it, because the other side is evil. So your side must be good. So that is the criteria of the assessment, not the merits of the situation, but the color of the shirt, the emblem on the breast. Because part of the reason why our politics is in such a mess and our politicians operate inconsistently is because as a population, we are not consistent. We want all laws to be enforced, and then we don't always obey the road traffic regulations. I mean, look, a cabinet minister was caught parking in a handicapped spot. Or I'll be only 5 minutes. That's not the point. How could cabinet then say, we're going to go after corruption? Meanwhile, you're playing fast and loose, yes, with the little laws, but it's a public display. It's a public example. You take your time on certain policy decisions, and on other policy decisions, you rush predetermined outcomes. People pick up on the lack of consistency. You fire police officers that have accusations against them, but then you defend police officers that have questionable behavior caught on film. And instead of explaining that behavior, you say we should have laws so that film like this doesn't get revealed to the public. How is that consistent? Where's the consistency? But we allow it to happen. Because the other side has to be evil, not because of what they did. Or when we have evidence that says they did something wrong, we jump at it, we love it. But when there's evidence that it's not so bad, we ignore it. It can't be true because it's them, whoever they are. Whenever there's anything that's just our side did anything wrong, that can't be true either because they're the ones that are saying it. Meanwhile, the vast majority of these claims and counterclaims are coming from politicians themselves. And if you had any degree of consistency, principles say you weigh them based on the merits of each individual case. If you want to take the context of the reputation of the individual speaker in the moment, fine. But on some level, if there's physical evidence, documentation, if there's sound logical reasoning, you still have to consider it. This is one of the things that gets parents in trouble. Like I said, parenting is one of the areas where a lack of consistency could really cause a lot of harm. When you believe one child over another, it's basically the same thing. That lack of consistency, it'll come back to haunt you later on in life. The difference is that is your personal situation. The stakes are technically, they're not small. You're talking about the development of small human beings into big human beings. But on a government level, now we're not talking the fate of a couple of children. Now we're talking the fate of all children and all the adults and all of the future. That's what's at stake whenever we select a government. Not just today, but tomorrow. Not just tomorrow, but the perpetual thereafter. And we have not buckled down to start to say, time out, these are standards. Because we want to clean up the corruption, but we're also the first ones to say, hey, you know anybody in licensing? Hey, you know anybody in TNTech? Hey, you know anybody in the Ministry of Education that can help my child? because everybody does it. So we want it cleaned up. But until it's cleaned up, we're going to add to the problem, be part of the problem. We're not going to try to be part of the solution. And you might say, well, yeah, it's stupid. Everybody is doing some level of corruption, some level of passing out favors or what have you. Why should I hold myself back? Well, if that's how we all think, we will never fix the corruption. That's why, yes, consistency. Now the PNM are saying we need campaign finance reform. Yeah, well, I mean, this is one of the legitimate complaints about the PNM in opposition. You say things without acknowledging the fact that it sounds very inconsistent with your previous stances. That said, Penelope Beckles, opposition leader, Marvin Gonzalez, opposition chief whip, it's not as though they were in such senior positions in the administration before. But still, you need to reconcile the inconsistency. And if you can't, it's an uphill battle because people will respond to the perceived inconsistency or outright inconsistency that's there. But the flip side of that is, I am fairly certain, didn't, in opposition, the UNC make the case for campaign finance reform? Yeah, let's see what happens, right? Consistency. Hey, remember the Prime Minister spoke about noise pollution? What if I was to tell you that one of their latest initiatives might be one of the largest noise pollutants in industry that we could ever possibly implement? Caribbean Airlines, they're going to add 7,000 plus domestic seats for the July-August peak travel period. Now, the long and short is, without more information, because they're going to include ATRs and 737s, and that last part there, 737s, suggests that this is not going to be a break-even situation. This is going to be an operating at a loss situation. For the benefit of Tobago, yes, Tobago's economy will benefit. The travelers will benefit. I don't necessarily think it's to the benefit of Caribbean Airlines. Part of it, however, that Caribbean Airlines needs to do more consistently is explain and operate under one set of criteria that makes sense. If you're operating at a loss with just too many ATR flights, giving us more information as to what the losses might be, or maybe what the break-even position might be, what the expected revenue versus operational expenses for this sort of endeavor in the July-August period, all of that would help. Because the public is going to see, oh, well, they just added flights. So why can't they always add flights? Because when you don't want to add flights, it's too expensive. But when you do add flights, you don't explain how you deal with the expense. And that's a disservice to the population, because I think it would be good for them to understand, July-August period, this is what it's going to cost us to add these flights. And if the figure is bad, we will understand and better appreciate your position when you say the air bridge, very difficult financial position it puts us in. And if the figure is not bad, then Lucy, you got a lot of explaining to do. Because I thought that operating the air bridge is a financial loss-making endeavor in general. Or at least it's not necessarily, one, as profitable as it should be, and two, not as easy to stay break-even or above. So deconflict that. That's one of the issues whenever we hear about these sorts of situations. Like, think about all the wage negotiations. We get 5%, 10%. We never actually get what the actual figures are. 10% in one salary might not equal 5% in another. 5% in another salary might actually be more. We don't know. And by keeping information from the public, yes, it prevents us from complaining about certain things, but it also makes it very difficult then for us to follow a pattern of consistency so that we have confidence with regards to what you're telling us, that we will have trust with regards to what you're telling us. Airlines are not too big to fail. Just always remember that. If Pan Am could go down, CAL could go down. And if CAL goes down, then what's going to happen to the air bridge? That is such a big contentious issue. I don't know if people necessarily consider that. CAL is one area where the Prime Minister said things need to improve, and I welcome it. But now the question is, will they actually improve, or is that just more politics? I guess we'll see with regards to results, but by the time we get to results, maybe it might be too late. That's why it's better to be consistent all the time up front and not try to scramble when things start to go bad and turn sour. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, I'll get into that potential new source of noise pollution. Data centers with noise pollution. We'll get into that next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Something very important, there is an intrinsic neurotrophic factor that is released through myokines, that is some peptides that we have in our muscle that produce neuromodulation and increase that peptide in the brain to increase the neurocognitive of the brain.
I'm glad you said that, right. So exercise has an important part to play in the aging brain. As we get older, our gray matter does shrink, we have reduction of synapses, but exercise is shown to actually improve our cognitive functioning.
Totally.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
I'm back here and talk about the WSN show, Michael Small, and of course, one of the issues, which is arguably within its theoretical stage, but if you listen to some of these speakers, you would wonder exactly how much far along the process is, not necessarily with regards of implementation, but with regards to fact-finding. The situation of 3 memorandums of understanding for the construction of data centers, 3 data centers. One is big as requiring 500 megawatts in power. down to maybe a small project of 150 megawatt structure. Now, the thing with data centers is, it's for AI, it's something of a new phenomenon in a way. As the technology of AI is now, it's not mature yet, it's maturing. How long that process takes, I don't know. But as more development, more capital, more exploration into the space is being done, the next step has been in other parts of the world, even larger projects for larger data centers. Now, I am under the impression that these data centers are not just necessary to provide services to the immediate region or even the country that they're in. These data centers might be the main server farm for a global artificial intelligence service, right? And it's very easy to say we should look to the future. The problem is the people before the government of Trinidad and Tobago potentially looked at the future and kind of went off premature, because now there's signs that perhaps the economic viability of data centers around the world was not fully understood, and too many assumptions were being made as the projects and the capital investment continue to scale up and up and up, under the assumption that, well, we have to keep up with the Joneses, we can't fall behind, and it'll sort itself out in the end. One of the things that I did not necessarily know, I heard about the power and water requirements, right? Just the sheer amount. And this has come up, I believe these are two of the main talking points with regards to data centers in TNT. And the government has basically come out and said, look, now what I find interesting is it's the tertiary education minister that's speaking about this. I'm not entirely sure if, I understand we assume tertiary education, academics, you should be knowledgeable. Yeah, if this was maybe the minister of digital transformation or something along those lines, or trade and industry or finance, I actually might put more weight into it. With regards to tertiary education, actually, I don't know if that is the most appropriate line ministry to say expertise on this subject matter is here, because it's not just about tech and innovation, it's about finance and economic realities on more levels than one. Now, they've pushed back, accusing opponents of the data center of being naysayers who complain regardless of the outcome. Well, we haven't actually seen any outcomes yet with regards to a lot of data center mega projects, right? And what outcomes we have seen hasn't been all that positive, right? Regional Corporation of Chairman of Pinal Debe is apparently trying to reassure the public any risks associated with the project would be properly managed. It's interesting that he said it that way. The reason why I say that is a day ago, so I believe this report is on statements made yesterday, but a day before that, I believe, Minister of Public Administration and Artificial Intelligence, Dominic Smith, he stressed that the MOUs, the agreements signed with MOUs are not approvals for development. Quote, it's important to remember that these are memoranda of understanding establishing a framework for collaboration and due diligence, not final project approvals. Any project that advances will undergo the necessary technical, environmental, and regulatory assessments. That first fact is crucial. What does that say? It says it hasn't been done yet. The agreements are not approvals for development. They're just MOUs to establish a framework for collaboration and due diligence. They have now established this framework to conduct due diligence, to start to figure this thing out, which then makes the statements that was said yesterday, reassuring us that any risk associated would be properly managed. Well, I have to ask, how do you even know what the risks are if due diligence has not been conducted yet? How do you know that naysayers would complain regardless of the outcome when we haven't even gotten the due diligence to project an outcome? I don't understand how they are. You have one minister saying, we are in the preliminary stages, do not panic. It is not as though anything is set in stone. We are not on a runaway train that we cannot change course from, that we cannot slow down and stop. We are in control. We are exploring the venture. We are going to do due diligence. That's the Minister of AI. I forgot that they had such a specific title in given to one of the ministers, but that's the line minister, one could argue in this case, saying the correct thing. And then the Minister of Tertiary Education comes in and says the gung-ho thing. I have to defend the government's position, even if I potentially am not saying anything to imply that I actually understand the topic at hand. Because how could you say, well, you know, regardless of the outcome, they're just being naysayers? They have communities around the world, jurisdictions around the world, nations around the world that are slowly starting to realize this might not be as straightforward or simple as capital venture tries to make it out to be. Now, generally speaking, we know that it's going to cost a lot of electricity and it's going to require a lot of water to cool down the data center. One of the things that I thought immediately was, if the demands on the electrical grid exponentially rise, we're not talking, oh, well, it's a parlor shop or a supermarket. It's a server farm the size of a mid-sized airport, which could be the size of Piarco, right? Or maybe even bigger. I'm not sure if Piarco qualifies as a mid-sized airport internationally. The power requirements of that is going to be far higher than a normal structure of that size you think would require. It might even require more than, say, an industrial operation with that size of a footprint. And what has apparently happened, at least in one community, so it's anecdotal, I haven't necessarily checked to see if this happens everywhere, is that because of the demands for power, market condition says the price of electricity goes up. And in one case, one lady in an American town was complaining, how am I supposed to afford to live when the price of electricity is higher than my mortgage? Which is not something she was expecting. And it's not because her electricity usage increased, it's because demand and supply said electricity for this area increased because there's a data center here. Now, let's go a step further. It's not as though we could easily afford to increase electricity production. Either we have to buy the gas or we have to use from the supply that we have. We don't have enough gas to go around with regards to our own projects, right? So we have to get the fossil fuels to generate the electricity. So either way, it's going to be a cost. And it's going to be an exponential increase in costs. And then we might be subjected to international market forces even more than we already are when you have natural gas price fluctuations. Because if we use our supply, well then how many more plants that are earning us foreign exchange are going to shut down if we are diverting our supply? And if we are having to import in order to generate electricity, then who's going to foot that bill? Because I don't think they're going to just give it to the data center. No, they're going to spread it around. And then we will have to bear our fair share of it. And in fact, the data center will be paying high prices of electricity if electricity prices goes up. But we'll still be paying high prices. They're not going to offset the cost for us. The rate's going to go up for everybody potentially. and we're going to potentially be the ones to suffer, or TNTech is going to have a financial hole. Usually it's $1 billion they're behind every year. That's probably not going to cover it. That's not going to come close to what multiple data centers potentially can do, especially if they are at the biggest size they possibly could be. That's not necessarily anything close to what could happen if these things come online. And this is consistent energy requirements. There's no downtime at night. These are always on, always costing. And then you have to cool it down. And then part of the electricity requirement is in order to power the cooling down process. But then you need, potentially, if it goes up to 500 megawatts, millions of gallons of water. One of the things that was not necessarily said, or isn't always said, is the potential need to add chemicals into that water, similar to chemicals you put in radiator water, from what I understand. The kind of things that will allow it, antifreeze. You don't want the cooling part of the mechanism to freeze the water. It needs to flow to the hot areas. And then there's a whole other things, anti-corrosion and so on and so on. Chemicals that might not be easy to separate from the water once you're done with it. So it's not as though you could recycle the water. Who knows what the heat might do to the chemicals in the water if you could just recycle the same amount of water to use to cool down the plant. If you always need new amounts of water, the implication is you always need new amounts of water. Now, we have an issue potentially with meeting electricity demands and keeping the cost down, and the government paying its own electricity bills to the tune of $1 billion every year. We also have issues with water. So where these plants goes could significantly affect the water supply for an area or a part of the country. And I'm not sure if we're ready to deal with that. So it's not just about building the data center itself. And one of the things with regards to data centers this size, 500 megawatt data center, 500,000 savers requiring 30,000 truckloads of materials to build. That's a lot of stuff that we would have to import into this country. That's a lot of stuff that have to be made available with regards to the computer hardware side of the equation, stuff that is currently experiencing shortages. Despite the fact that certain mega projects have been scaled back, given the direction of the market. They already have situations where large corporations have blown through their budget for AI usage, their annual budget, and we're in July, and they've blown through it probably, last month or even before. The whole now market conditions of AI, our experience is, well, AI generally is free. Well, that's because capital investment was footing the bill. And the problem is, on some level now, the initial venture capital is starting to dry up. Now they're going to loan finances or high prices. So now the question is, how easy is this thing to commercialize? So you have the coolants, you have that's a whole industrial process on top of the electricity requirements for the servers themselves and the processors of the servers and stuff. Remember I said noise pollution? Well, apparently in some cases, you could get as much as a 90 decibel hum. An always constant 90 decibel hum, depending on where this is built. A hum that potentially could travel significant distance. The sound waves could travel through things like the ground, bedrock, etc., etc. There's no real way to deal with it because you're talking about not a single AC unit, but a cooling system on that scale. Then there's also the consideration of essentially how much heat is going to be transferred just into the environment. But one of the things is they basically took a video by somebody's house who is living in a community where they put a data center. And it was essentially this loud, constant humming of machinery that does not sound like, if I guess on some level, if you think loud music is bad. So there's energy demands, which could increase the cost of electricity. There's water demands, which could, make the supply of water in parts of the country now become tenuous at best. There's the potential for water pollution, which could potentially affect the health of citizens as well as the environment itself. Where are we going to put it? In agricultural lands? We're going to put it near the city? We're going to put it near a suburb? We're going to put it out in the mountain? Here's another example now, because I started to touch on the commercialization. You do these things, you invest in these things, right? They're going to make the money, in theory, some way. That's to justify the investment. Even when you have a road infrastructure project, it indirectly pays for itself with regards to the increase in productivity that your country will experience, therefore giving you a growth in GDP, right? So yes, it doesn't actually, unless you have a tool, you can have a tool, but if you don't have a tool, new road infrastructure will indirectly pay for itself because it's providing valuable service that does have an economic benefit. Now, a data center, how does it give us an economic benefit? Well, they say it will provide jobs and foreign exchange. Yes, if it's built with foreign capital investment or loan financing, we will get that initial foreign exchange. But that's not necessarily a sustained thing, right? What's more important is the jobs, is the ongoing business of having a data center. Well, apparently there was, I think, a former Secretary of Energy was going to have some massive data center project, and it was supposed to be the Donald Trump's server farm, something, 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 right? Donald Trump attached his name to it. And that project stalled, and the CEO and CFO resigned because they have no tenant. Because essentially, they were building the physical infrastructure, but there wasn't going to be anybody to use it. And given the sheer cost of the endeavor, they weren't necessarily going to just blindly continue to build the thing without knowing if they could even find a potential user who will then pay to have their systems put on the servers and basically be the tenant of said facility. We don't have an AI product to put in an AI data center. So the idea is somebody is going to have to want to come here. And if that could happen, that's fine, that's great. But one of the things that has been coming out is the fact that on some level, certain high-profile projects have either started to slow down construction, quietly maybe suspend operations, downsize their initial project scale, not be as large of a footprint, not have as large of a facility, because there's concerns that this could be a bubble situation. And if that bubble pops, the entire industry, the finances, because it's still predicated not on revenue, but on capital and loans. And if that bubble pops, all of a sudden, banks are going to no longer want to lend, and then they could no longer continue to get enough money to keep their day-to-day operations going, because you don't run these things on the cheap. Whether they make money or not, they are major investments that then the electricity, it's not just the fact that it uses a lot, it's going to cost a lot. Same thing with the water in theory, even with our ridiculously low utility rates on both counts. It's still going to cost a significant amount of money. So how do we actually commercialize these things? Because the corporate sector is also seeing the limitations now of AI. So it's nice to push to the future, but the corporate world is slowly but surely getting signs that the product cannot deliver everything that the visionaries are promising. That the costs are increasing exponentially, but the improvements are not increasing at the same rate. And that it's becoming more and more difficult to make these situations not even just profitable, but to figure out how best to earn revenue from it. Now, the AI companies, on some level, they have to continue on some level, in some scale. But when you have projects around the world, potentially either slowing down, scaling back, or shutting down, they still have big projects ongoing. But now the question is, why are these projects coming here? Because there are countries that says, no, there are some local governments, some states, some administrative zones, some full-out nations that are saying, maybe we don't want this here. Maybe we don't want to deal with the strain on our resources, the increased cost of living that might come from it, and the additional potential for noise pollution, heat pollution, chemical pollution. Are we now the patsies? They can't do it elsewhere, so they're going to do it here? Is that the appeal? That at some point everybody else is going to figure out, hey, unless we're like a desert, and even then, that's technically still an environment you have to protect, right? But unless we're like a desert that people really don't care, the impacts of these things are so bad, we can't do it in our own countries, let's do it in yours. One of the reasons, however, that projects are slowing down is also the fact that there are shortages in components, the manufacturing side of things. So we could have all the MOUs that we want with the various different partners that we secure. Now the thing is, hopefully we're not potentially financing it, because what happens if the whole project stalls because you can't get enough components? You can't get enough GPUs. You can't get enough servers. Just the IT infrastructure alone, there's never really been. Server farms of before for other applications have never reached this size. That's why on some level now, everyone's struggling to keep up to understand the implications of projects like these. And the thing is, with regards to AI, apparently, you can just use lesser models that might give you as much as 80% of the capabilities as the most advanced systems, but wouldn't require anywhere near as much infrastructure to operate. And then you could also make that infrastructure locally on a smaller scale per each geographical area, and then you won't necessarily have the concentrated impact economically and environmentally that these mega projects will have. Apparently, it's not just the potential of noise pollution from the cooling systems, but also the potential of air pollution locally if they need to have backup generators in order to power the things. One can imagine with our electricity grid where, at least in parts of the country, there's power load sharing or load shedding. The backup generators for this alone is going to be a scale that we probably cannot comprehend. And then, of course, even if it's coming from electricity generation from, a power generating plant, unless we go nuclear, wind and solar ain't going to cut it, by the way. Wind and solar ain't going to cut it for something like this. You need consistent power, which means minimum natural gas. So that's a lot more natural gas being burnt in our immediate vicinity. Wind and solar are too inconsistent, and you don't get solar at night. And just the sheer demands of power implies wind and solar farms on a scale that I can't even imagine. And then a battery farm to correspond with it, and again, you're not necessarily guaranteed for consistent power given day-night cycles and weather. So, I appreciate what the minister said, because he is saying the responsible thing. This is Dominic Smith, Minister of Public Administration and Artificial Intelligence. The thing is, it's a new technology. So in theory, it gives us a chance, if we adopt it responsibly and early enough, we could get a competitive advantage to offer a product or service that not a lot of other people will offer. Now, on some level, we also potentially will be competing with other such projects around the world. To what extent will our products, our data centers provide the industry, fill a need or find a user? And in terms of if it's an AI data center, an AI company would want to come here, right? Is it to facilitate just our country alone, the Caribbean region, the wider surrounding nations of the Caribbean Sea, parts of South America? I don't know. But one of the things is when you get a financial center, I think like Singapore or Iceland, it's not that they have some sort of competitive advantage in their location per se, but rather it's the fact that, hey, we jumped ahead of the game and we basically built up our capacity to provide this service. Why are you going to go with somebody else? We already have it. So I get that. I get that new technology, innovation, and new developments in technology that leads to a change in the way how the world works, that leads to opportunities. But let's not forget, green energy was also viewed as such for countries like Germany. What happened recently? It was not mature enough that they could have suffered the loss of Russian gas. Green energy, for all of the investment, for all of the government capital expenditure, political capital expenditure, has not matured to the point where Germany could say, we now are industry leaders in this new technology and we are benefiting economically from it. Rather, what they could say is, well, our cost of electricity went up by 4 times by trying to run these parallel energy production systems in order to ensure consistent power. And because of that, has it really been a benefit or a negative? And on some level, AI could be that as well, because it seems as though the interest rates on loans to keep financing these projects are rising. I heard one person describe it basically now it's reached the point where it's junk bond rates. I'm not a financial person. I don't necessarily know how true that is. There might be specific details that might make it true or not necessarily true just yet. Part of it also is, as the bubble continues to grow, maybe no one has an incentive to pop the bubble, at least not yet. Because you don't necessarily want to, kill the goose that can, in the future, lay golden eggs. That's what everyone's hoping for. We haven't actually seen the eggs being laid. This is all just the promise of the eggs. And that's part of the due diligence that we're supposed to be conducting. How will we make the situation economically beneficial to us? Because yes, there will be jobs for the server farm. But let's put it a different way. One of the issues I have with Mr. Manning, as much as I appreciate the good that he did, well, he got a snapper, which on the surface looks like something that should be good, something that should benefit the country. It's a much larger performance space than Queen's Hall. in terms of, I believe, seating capacity, as well as space on the stage. The problem is, no one necessarily thought, well, exactly how is this project going to work? How is this project going to pay for itself in the future? And it had a lot of deficiencies, some of which is structural, so cannot easily be rectified and has not been rectified. And at the end of the day, we have another concert venue in proximity to the Savannah. To what extent was that really a worthy use of public funds? I don't know how much the Chinese maybe financed it. Apparently it was a ready-made structure. I don't know if we got it for the cheap, but now we still have to upkeep it. And yes, we do get use out of it, but Queen's Hall is still the premier location for a reason. To the point where management of Napa, at least at one point, was handed over to the board of Queen's Hall, if my understanding is correct, or the management of Queen's Hall. So just saying we're going to do bigger, better, have a project and it's going to just automatically work. No, that's not how these things actually go. So right now, there's a change in the org position, 3,200 verified signatures, less than a day after it was launched, to halt approval for proposed data centers. Now again, if you go by what the minister said, this is not approval, this is memorandums of understanding that will establish the framework of the next step, which is, according to Minister Smith, not at the stage of just granting approvals. But it speaks to the concerns that some people have in the country. Hyperscale facilities, quote, can require substantial amounts of water for cooling, consuming enormous quantities of electricity and place additional demands on public infrastructure. Given that we already have a long-standing water crisis, many households experience intermittent supplies or relying on water tanks and truck-borne deliveries. All of these things are true. So on some level, the government needs to do a better job than just saying, don't be a naysayer. Because the thing is, part of the due diligence is you can't just say, don't be negative. You can't just brush things aside to say, let me get to the quote there. Any risk associated with the project will be properly managed. That doesn't mean anything. This is where what I mentioned earlier, this is an example of what I was saying. They're not giving you details on the hows, whens, whys, or whats. They're just telling you, don't worry about it. We'll manage it properly. Never in the history of the democratic government has there ever been anything bad that comes after a statement like that. Never happened. And if you can't tell, that's me being sarcastic. I mean, it's really funny that the Minister of Tertiary Education has then said later, as you said, nothing has been defined as that. So I think maybe some of these issues are a bit premature. The issues aren't premature. We know what the potential issues are. They are experienced consistently from data center to data center. It's not as though some data centers have these unique issues and we're wondering if the proposals might, for Trinidad and Tobago, include those issues. We know that these issues are, relatively speaking, universal on some level. So to say that the concerns are premature, I think, shows potentially a misunderstanding of the subject matter. Perhaps the Minister of Tertiary Education should maybe take a course or two in one of his facilities, I imagine. They're always the naysayers. They'll complain there are no jobs. And if you do something that creates jobs, they'll complain about that also. Well, there's a lot of things you could do to create jobs. If all you're concerned about is creating jobs, you could have left CPAP and Europe as is. There's a lot of ways to create jobs, but this very government has acknowledged the fact that perhaps some endeavors that created jobs in the past were not necessarily being operated in a financially and legally responsible manner. So just to say that it's creating jobs, why are you complaining? Again, you're not the Minister of Labor. Maybe you should keep labor arguments to somebody else. Just to say, oh, well, it'll create jobs. And is it financially a responsible way of creating jobs? We could give everybody a salary to walk around in Savannah. That's creating jobs. Yes, I know that's an extreme example, but it's to show the point. Just because it creates jobs doesn't make it automatically benign, automatically benevolent, automatically positive and profitable. And again, it suggests the fact that the Minister of Teacher Education is speaking without knowledge. Because if he had knowledge, I'm fairly certain he could make a better crafted argument than that. Before you do any large construction project, you need to get the environment reclaimed, you need to get the CEC certificate, so that's going to happen. Is it? Why is it seeming that the minister is speaking on the assumption that these things are fine? And then he acknowledges, with regards to the petition calling for the approvals to be suspended, he correctly acknowledges, quote, I think the Minister of Public Utilities addressed that concern adequately. Oh, sorry, no, that's not the same minister. That's Barry Padrath. Apparently, there's short and medium and long-term plans already in place in order to meet the water requirements in Divi. That's interesting. Given the fact that we had a water shortage and water for all was one of the rallying cries of every government, somehow it wasn't that easy to get the water when the citizens needed it. But for the data centers, we'll find the water. Consistency. I don't like how the messaging seems to be, and one of the things that I thought of is this reminds me of when then Minister of Finance Colm Imbert spoke about digital transformation. It just came across as though he was reading a script that included terms and buzzwords that he didn't actually understand. Technical terms that he didn't really know what they were. He just was told, read this. So he read it. These were not topics that he continued discussing multiple times into the future, utilizing the terminology as part of his own vernacular with regards to said conversations. No, these were just technical terms that he used in an official speech once or twice, maybe in a budget, and then we never heard him speak about those topics in that capacity again, or at least in any significant way. And part of the issue with this is there are identified pitfalls with regards to either governments or the population, when the government ignores the concerns, having negative reactions or facing negative consequences from data centers. And dare I say, it seems as though they're looking for a silver bullet and they don't care about the potential ramifications. Because to them, it's not set in stone, so everything is going to be fine because everybody else is doing data centers, and obviously if everybody else is doing it, it should be fine. Germany went to green energy. Their price of electricity went up. Australia tried to implement green energy. Their price of electricity went up. But everybody is doing it, so obviously it must be fine. France wanted to decommission its nuclear power plants and go to renewable energy sources like solar and wind. If they did that, they would have seen an increase in the price of energy for sure. Just because you do a thing doesn't mean, oh, it's fine. I mean, if everybody walk up a cliff, will you walk off a cliff too? As your parents probably would have said at some point in your life. The inability to explain the concerns, to explain the reason of why we should not be so concerned yet, for the bulk of the government speakers, I find is alarming. The Prime Minister has said the establishment of data centers will not put a strain on the country's water and electricity resources. When the Minister of Public Administration and AI says that we're going to do the due diligence, not that we have, that we will, that the framework is in place which says that they will do the due diligence, how can the Prime Minister say this? How? How do you know this for sure? Where is the due diligence? She said the data centers were good private sector funded projects intended to create jobs and diversify the country's revenue streams. I get it, it will do that in theory. But the AI companies themselves are potentially looking at a bubble that might burst. Are we now going to opt into this situation? I mean, when they had the financial crisis in 2008, we just happened to also have the Clico situation. I don't know why we need to follow fashion in this manner apparently every time. There's a major global financial bubble in some industry or another, and we just have to participate, we have to take part. Quote, any project will have some type of environmental impact, so planners will cater for that in their designs. Foreign companies want to invest in Trinidad, and that's a good sign for future prosperity. Yes, because potentially no one wants to host their projects, or at least no one that they deem suitable enough. So we get to be the patsies, potentially. Because how could you say planners will cater for that in their designs? What does that mean? Do you know what it means? What are you going to do about the water and electricity demands? Are you guaranteeing us that the price of electricity will not rise if data centers drive up consumption of electricity? Are you going to guarantee that? Are you going to guarantee that enough capital investment into new sources of water will be spent, but also that the water in the ground exists? You could spend all the money to get more water that you want to spend. If the groundwater isn't there, drilling wells ain't going to help. Or what, you're going to put a second well next to the first well? It's the same source. You potentially are just extracting it faster and making now that source unsustainable. Because they have to create jobs. CPEP and URP provided jobs. And here's the thing, some of the jobs required by the economy are not skilled labor jobs. No, you now have to train your population to do this work on some technical level. And of course, the higher the wages for the jobs, the higher the operating costs for the facility, the higher the operating costs for the facility, the more strain it has on any potential tenant, the more strain it has on any potential tenant, the increase in the potential for no one wanting to come here. Or are we outsourcing all these jobs? Because some of the higher end technical jobs of managing this facility, I don't know if we have anybody locally qualified to do that. Unless it's someone from the diaspora that has that experience from abroad. Is this going to be a situation where we're doing a thing for jobs and then all of the top jobs are taken by foreigners? The Prime Minister said the company's facility designs are to be submitted for approvals and final financial negotiations with the relevant state enterprises are to be completed. What does that mean? It's amazing that, this is the quote, it's amazing that these people sign a petition objecting to something that they have no details about. It makes better sense to wait on the companies to publish their proposals. Or, so they haven't given proposals yet, you haven't done your due diligence yet, but you are saying in absolute terms that any project will have the planners cater for the environmental impact. Any project will have some type of environmental impact, so planners will cater for that in their designs. That's not a will try, will do their best, should be able. No, you're saying it almost like if it's just a factual thing. 1 + 1 is 2. After A becomes B, then C. There will be an impact, They'll account for it, we'll move on. No muss, no fuss. Guaranteed, just like how everyone's winning, we guarantee that the environmental impact will be catered for. How can you say that when you don't know what the proposals are? You said so yourself. How could they complain about the proposals when they don't have the details because we haven't seen the proposals yet? I mean, have you seen the proposals from the companies? Because according to the minister, it didn't reach that stage yet. So what's going on? Who is the inconsistent party between the Minister of AI and his Prime Minister? Or the Prime Minister and her Minister of AI? Someone, please tell me. Because the thing is, once the thing is built, you have to understand something. The amount of money spent to build it means, one, you really don't want to then not use it, right? But more importantly, the kind of components that makes up a data center like this, scrapping it has its own set of environmental concerns just off of the sheer scale of electronics. So again, I have no problem looking towards the future, looking towards innovation. But it seems as though too many members of the government don't know or are ignoring reasonable concerns. Can we put up the comment? Good morning. It's the same in the Point Lisa's estate. I live there. Lots of water to cool, some constant noise, lots of energy to run the equipment. What's new? That's the future. That's the way we have to go. It's a positive with good management. Thanks. No, what you're missing is the fact that this will dwarf Point Lisa's. In terms of the water required, it will dwarf it. In terms of the noise, it will probably dwarf it. In terms of the energy, it will definitely dwarf it. So it's not the same scale. So you can't say it's the same. Theoretically, it's the same in the sense that, yes, water is involved and electricity is involved and noise pollution is involved. But the scale of the thing, there are people that are concerned literally about the amount of heat being generated. We don't talk about industrial plants in the same way, where the heat that this facility will give off is an issue for communities. The concerns about these facilities are at a different level. The shock to the electrical grid is on a different level. So I understand the temptation to think that we know what this is going to mean. But when you have nations that have bigger industrial facilities than ours, that have more experience with industrial operations than we do, having issues with these projects. Right now, one of the smartest, so there's two alternative proposals. One is the space, which doesn't seem to be as practical as one could think, and one is doing it in the sea. The idea being you wouldn't necessarily have to spend that much energy to operate a cooling system when you're operating under the sea, right? Now, the construction cost of a project like that, that's outside of our financial means and probably outside of the means of any sort of investment project here locally. And that's the thing. In fact, what the comments, the perspective of the comment, now listen, maybe the comment is right, just by the way. That's why I said, remember I said at the very beginning, it's kind of theoretical. The commenter might be right, I might be wrong. But given what I have seen and the evidence thus far, it suggests that the commenter is underestimating the situation. And I believe that is potentially what's going on in the government. They are underestimating the situation because you're prioritizing progress, not necessarily understanding the cost of the progress. Take the airport in Tobago. Oh my gosh, it's a new airport. Yes, it's going to cost money to have a new airport. You need a new airport to grow your tourism product. But the tourism product isn't growing. So the airport in Tobago will provide more jobs. But we didn't need an airport of that size just yet. So now justify the greater amount of jobs to operate this airport to me, please. Because the airport, the new airport, operates at a different scale. It operates at a different scale to the pre-existing facility, a scale that we don't need, but it will provide jobs. A scale that potentially is economically unsustainable. It might not be able to sustain itself, but it will provide jobs. Maintenance costs will be higher because it's a bigger facility with capabilities that the previous airport didn't have. It didn't have sky bridges, the previous airport in Tobago. The security concerns of this facility are higher, in my opinion, given the layout and the proximity to a public access road. But hey, it was progress. We progressed. We have a bigger airport. We have improved the airport facilities on the island of Tobago. Am I the only one to give consideration to the economic reality of what was necessary, of the opportunity cost of that project? Because that's the thing. We are going to, even if it's foreign investment paying for it, we are going to be putting some kind of effort into this project, right? It's going to have to be, of course, now with all of the legal frameworks and making sure all of the environmental concerns are correct, as much as we can potentially address them. You know, if we need to train our population to do the work because we've never had data centers and server farms before, and so on and so on. There's going to be opportunity cost for all of this, where the attention and focus and prioritization, even if the financing is coming from somewhere else, there's going to be some sort of effort being put into this that could have been put elsewhere. And given the fact that there are enough reasons to say it's not automatic that it would succeed. Now, I'm not saying that I want it to fail, but part of it is, at the very least, if you want to, because again, let me go back to the point I was trying to make. What is most of the government saying? It will create jobs. How? What kind of jobs? What is the time frame for the job creation? Will the project begin before you're out of office? It might take a whole, I don't know how many years for the construction to start. Are we just counting the construction jobs? Because then we might run into an issue where the construction sector will have a shortage of workers for other projects. What about the promises for housing? Again, there are opportunity costs for this. What are the unintended consequences to our economy that normally does not have this much excess capacity of anything, whether it's labor, whether it's material, electricity, water? What's the unintended consequences here? Now, granted, again, Minister West is the responsible one in this whole thing. Approvals were not granted yet. These are not approvals for development. These are just MOUs to set us up to take the next step. But what is the rest of the government saying? We'll solve it. We'll figure it out. All the concerns will be addressed. I remember when promises like this was made last year. What was it again? What did the government say last year to try to calm our fears, to ensure that we don't panic, and to ensure that we don't lose trust and confidence in their ability to find a solution to the problem? Oh, they said, don't worry, we'll find the money. They found the money, all right. Now, maybe you are not directly feeling the increased cost of living based on what they did or didn't do. But there are others in the population who have. They'll find the money. It's the unethical property tax. That's where they found the money. It's the customs and excise and the taxes. That's where they'll find the money. It's the road traffic violation fees and penalties. That's where they'll find the money. But they didn't say that when they said they'll find the money, did they? No, the implication was we'll figure out a way. Yes, it might not necessarily be easy for everybody, but we'll figure out a way to deal with the financial challenges. Whereas now it feels as though the way how they intend to deal with the financial challenges is pass the buck on to you as much as possible, coming just before the point where you riot. P&M said, we changed the price of gas, ain't riot yet. UNC, they haven't said it, but I imagine somebody made this joke behind closed doors. Well, we raised the price of alcohol and they ain't riot yet. Look how complacent these people are. I don't have an issue with moving the project forward. I have an issue with the approach. The approach where basically this is, we'll find the money 2.0. See, Kamla 2.0, not necessarily that much of an upgrade. We'll find the money 2.0, or we'll find the money part 2. Definitely a sequel. The issues won't be a problem. That's the new one. Last year it was, we'll find the money. This year, we'll figure it out. Any risks will be properly managed. What does that mean? You can't make claims but be upset about the negative criticism, saying, well, you all don't know enough to make criticism. You don't know enough to make claims. But the fact that they're willing to make these claims now tells me that this is not a situation where they looked at a potential solution, assessed the solution, worked out the kinks, and will try to implement a practical version of it. What this tells me is somebody thought they had a bright idea, sold the rest of cabinet on this genius idea, and now no one could go against the genius idea because we already all agree that it's a genius idea. So if you were to speak out against the genius idea, you're just being a negative Nancy. You're just being difficult. Because we need a win. And this looks like a win. Because if you check, ironically, months ago, this would have been an easy win. Not so much anymore if you've kept up to date with the happenings of data farms, chip manufacturers, AI companies, corporate usage of AI. If you've kept up with these things, you'll know that potentially it is a house of cards, that it is a bubble that could pop, and that it's not automatic that this is going to be a win. But someone has sold the government that this is a win. And now it seems as though, given the fact that they're saying things like, it will be properly managed, all the risks, they would be properly managed. Not, we are looking to put things in place, we're going to do our due diligence to ensure that they're either properly managed or we will not go ahead with an irresponsible project. That's not what's being said. What's being said is the assumption to the point where it's being spoken of in absolute terms that it will be fine. And that says that the agenda is not to have a project done responsibly, but rather just to have the project for the optics. That's it. They opened a children's hospital. Half the facility is not for children. Now, at that level, is it really a children's hospital then? But for the optics, it's a children's hospital. The practical reality is it's not really a children's hospital. But for the optics, it is. These projects will create jobs. We don't even know what the quality of jobs are going to be, what the pay is going to be, how sustainable it's going to be. But it's going to make jobs. I mean, the airport made jobs, right? That doesn't necessarily make the project better. You want jobs? Government could just hire more people into the ministries and then we get more jobs. But we wouldn't like that because we needed to have some sort of productivity in return in order to bring value to the country. I don't know if they even understand how AI data centers work. Therefore, how will it be able to be financially sustainable so that the country will get a return for having this potentially damaging thing here? And you know how I know that the government probably doesn't know how to make this thing financially sustainable? Because the AI companies themselves do not fully know how to make these things financially sustainable. The AI companies themselves don't fully know how to monetize their own creation. And then they don't necessarily know, subsequently, how to properly, economically, responsibly operate these mega data farms. They're just building it in anticipation. It's not that it's going to make money, that there's promises of profit. It's that the industry is assuming this is the direction we need to go. And everybody is fighting to keep up because they're afraid of being left behind. Because if you're left behind in a bleeding edge technology, you're going to lose out. Nokia did not go into the smartphones dimension. BlackBerry decided to stick with their isolated environment or infrastructure. And what used to be giants in the mobile phone market, ICNTT, everybody had a BlackBerry. And before that, everybody had a Nokia. Do you have BlackBerries or Nokias now? But the thing about innovation is it ultimately has boatloads of inherent risk because you're operating without knowledge of the outcome. That's the whole point. That's why not everybody undertakes innovation on this level. Now, all these data AI companies, they're racing to a finish line. They don't even know what the finish line is. How do we know that things are going to work out if we participate in this whole endeavor, in this whole industry, in this whole rat race? We technically don't. Everyone, to some extent, is kind of rolling the dice. The thing is, something will be profitable on the other side. The question is, what version of it? Is it going to be the most specialized, largest mega projects? That might be the ones that win in the end, or it might be the ones that show more patience, that balance out the needs of innovation with fiscal responsibility to their shareholders and decides, let's focus on sustainability than outright what is the top end of performance. Because right now, it's unsure if outside of military applications that the most extreme top end of AI performance is going to be in demand by the consumer public. What to use AI for? There are certain AI programs that could already be on your phone. So you might think, oh, well, what's the big deal? It's not that it demands much processing power. No, the point is, the stuff that they want to do is way above that. But do you really need it? Take supersonic passenger flight. You had Concorde. It wasn't that Concorde as a technology failed. They did it. They operated it. Even with the crashes notwithstanding, there was no inherent design flaw in the plane or no inherent flaw in the concept of supersonic commercial passenger flights. It just wasn't economically viable. It was innovative. It created high-end specialized jobs. But Air France and British Airways eventually both said, enough, we don't need to do this anymore because it doesn't make sense. It's not worth it. That is an example of where a technology was pushed to the extreme and the market, the public, could not generate enough demand for the top end of what could be done technologically for that industry. We don't know if that's going to be the same thing for data centers. The implication right now, the indicators are that very well might be the truth. which could mean that data centers like these are redundant, completely unnecessary. We might maybe one, we don't necessarily need three, and maybe with the 3 MOUs it will end up being one project. But again, there are alternatives for everyday use, where it could be on your phone, or it could be on a much smaller facility, the size of an ordinary building, or even smaller. There's one AI program that potentially, I mean, depending on safer traffic, might literally just need a handful of GPUs to operate properly. Now, to what extent are we going to have high-end commercial AI demands, you know, with regards to video processing and image creation, right? Do we want to be making movies with AI? That's a whole other thing. China right now is doing that. It's a mixed bag at best. And there's already been some conversations on the internet about the younger generations who are more comfortable with digital technology. They recognize AI movies and TV shows and commercials, and they don't like it one bit. They reject it outright. They identify it easier than us older folks. And just because it's digital doesn't mean, oh, this is cool. No, they don't like it. They don't respond well to it. So this whole thing about AI making movies and AI could replace all of the creatives. Right now, a lot of the cookie cutter popular music that you get on Spotify, they can't sell out their tours. What's the point of having AI to make music if potentially the commercial response to it is going to be limited at best? Same thing for movies and TV shows. So what do you need the top end for? We don't have a military. What do we need it for? What does this region need it for? Is it a data center for some other application for some other part of the world? Well, then that also would be predicated on your IT or ICT infrastructure. So that's another thing I will also have to try to keep up with this data center. Because the thing is, being able to process all this information is cool, but you need to have the infrastructure for communications in order to be able to upload all of the requests or the answers to whatever queries are sent to this data center. Do we have that? All of these are questions I don't think the government is ready to answer, because they themselves barely, if at all, understand it. And I kind of feel sorry, because I think the people who are actually working on this are probably going to say everything is premature. And on some level, the population is going to pick up on the government's inconsistency, lack of understanding, and insufficient details. And it's going to look more negative to the general public, and it's going to fuel the petition. It's going to fuel the petition. And for the people who are actually working on this in good faith, they're potentially going to see their work wasted, because we're going to have the debate premature, because the government doesn't understand if you make promises up front that you should not be ready to make, while acknowledging the fact that the criticism is premature, but you're making promises in absolute terms also premature. You're accelerating the debate. You're not forestalling it. You're not pushing it back to when it is the appropriate time to have it. You yourself are pulling it forward with the petition to have the debate now. By your own words, you are setting up the situation to failure, because you don't know how to handle the communications consistently. All right. Let's take the other comment. Good day. Forgive my limited knowledge in the topic, but can the government explain to me why volumes of gallons of water to supply to the data center when they can't supply the citizens the 24/7 supply of water to citizens throughout the country? So I think my assumption, because again, it's not as though the government will explain this properly. To be fair, Minister Padarath, I guess it's implied with what he said, right? My assumption is any project should include some amount of capital to help expand the water infrastructure in order to increase supply. That's why I said that is predicated on if we actually have the capacity in the ground to extract more from. We could get more pumping stations all we want. But at the end of the day, once we've tapped all of the natural water supply in the country, that's it, we're at the limit. Then we have to look at other things. Now maybe they'll put it close to the coast and it'll have a desalinization plant, maybe. But of course, now that's more expensive than groundwater. So that, on some level, I am adding enough speculation to make it make sense by saying, I believe part of the capital investment from foreign investors will be with regards to the water supply. But I could be wrong, because maybe the companies that sign these MOUs don't want to have to foot that bill. And might tell us, well, the reason why we're here is you have to sort out your side of the equation, which would be things like the public utilities. And in that case, and this is one of those things where I am giving the government the benefit of the doubt that technically I don't know if they deserve, because it seems as though they don't fully understand the complexity and the scale of the problem. That's why they're just saying, they're using language that is very dismissive. As though, what, there's an anthill? We'll just move the anthill. No, this is not that. There's a mountain. Are you going to just casually say, we'll just move the mountain? Any risk? Again, I'm going to go back to the chairman of the Penal Debe Regional Corporation. Because when I think about expertise in innovative technologies with regards to AI and data centers, mega projects to operate these things in, I'm going to think of a local government corporation chairman when he says to the public that any risks associated with the project would be properly managed. Dare I use the Prime Minister's statements, right? It's amazing that these government people, I'm paraphrasing with that part there, defending something that they have no details about. It makes better sense to wait on the companies to publish their proposals. Oh, the Prime Minister said they will construct ponds. Because you make a pond, right? And the pond will collect rain. But generally speaking, unless that water went straight out to sea in a river, one could argue some of that water would have been part of the groundwater that you otherwise, get out from wells or what have you. So again, it's not just about saying that we're going to make infrastructure for water. It's what is the actual water supply of the island from the rain. And is there going to be enough untapped water to supply this data center? I don't know. Have we done our due diligence on that? Probably not. But the Prime Minister made a claim, I guess because the Minister of Public Utilities made a claim, because seemingly it's not about doing a project responsibly, and if we can't do it responsibly and sustainably, we're not going to do it at all. It's about doing a project that sounds good, that's a win. So we'll see. We'll see. To be fair, the Prime Minister at least had a bit more information to say, but I'm still not confident if they fully understand everything. And I mean, so it's going to be constructed in Picton Debe. How close to residential homes is this going to be? The actual site, did they do due diligence on the noise pollution? All these sites are clear of any residents. Yeah, it's not just if the site doesn't have residents. Are there residents around the site? What is the proximity of residents to the site? So I don't know. Again, I'll end with this. I honestly think Minister West said it correct, right? I'll agree with the Prime Minister that we should wait and see what actually the proposals are, what the actual specifications are, what the actual requirements should be. The thing is, they should wait on that before they try to defend the situation. The Minister West said it best. We have put the framework for the collaboration with these entities and for the due diligence into any proposal. I just am afraid that they're not actually going to do proper due diligence. That's all. You want to make me give you the benefit of the doubt, change my mind? Be less sloppy in your communication. Be more consistent in the quality of your communication. All right, let's end things there. They're necessary. Went on for quite some bit because this is one of those things where once you commit to it, this is one of those things where if we commit to this thing, buyer's remorse, you know, in hindsight is going to be very, very not useful. That's why you have to get it right in advance. You have to do it right from the beginning. You can't fix it. You can't discover problems and fix it, you know, after you built the thing. Something on this scale, we can't afford to do that. I don't know if we would have a project quite like this, because it's not just about, again, the size of it, but a lot of the technical demands and expenses to operate it. I don't know if we would have anything quite on this level. So it's not something to just, oh, well, you know, we did a thing like Napa. Napa will be dwarfed by this because arguably Napa has structural deficiencies as a performing space that's built into it that cannot actually be fixed in any meaningful way. You can't allow a project like this to have that happen and then we just say, well, oops, and move on. It'll make the refinery look like kids' play, potentially, with regards to demands. Maybe I'm wrong. You know what? I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. So with that, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it's all going to work out. I hope that it's not as difficult as everything that I've seen so far leads me to believe how difficult it would be. I hope that it's going to be a lot simpler than I think. I hope that it's going to be a lot profitable than I think it's probably going to be. And I hope that Trinidad and Tobago will be the center of AI data processing, et cetera, for this part of the world's south of North America. You know, and we'll facilitate AI services to South America, Africa, and who knows where else. I hope for all these things. I'll believe it when I see it. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe. Don't forget, it's nice to be nice. So please, politicians, don't be condescending to when the public has concerns, you know. Maybe just figure out a way to respectfully engage in dialogue with them. Now, if you were prepared to do so, you know, you would need to have all your ducks in a row. You need to have your understanding of the topic at hand. You can't just brush people aside with convenient slogans and excuses. But, you know, who am I to tell you about leadership? It's not as though you haven't been succeeding for the last few months now. Spectacular success. So, it's nice to be nice. I guess that wasn't very nice of me just now, but I couldn't help myself. Have a good day. Stay safe. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN